At exactly 7 a.m., a pounding on the door jolted me awake. Still groggy, I stumbled toward the noise, not expecting anything unusual. But when I opened the door, I froze. There she was, my unemployed sister, standing tall with overstuffed bags hanging from her shoulders, her expression determined, almost defiant, as if she had every right to be there. Before I could even ask why she was there so early, she brushed past me, dropped her belongings on the living room floor, and with a smirk declared, "I'll live here." My mouth went dry. This wasn't just any apartment, this was the place I had worked for years to afford, the home I rented directly from my parents with my own money. Every late night shift, every dollar saved, every sacrifice, it all existed so I could have this one corner of independence. And now, in one arrogant sentence, my sister dismissed it as though it was nothing more than a family spare room waiting for her to occupy. My first instinct was disbelief, then anger rising hot in my chest. I grabbed my phone and called my mother immediately, hoping, praying, that she would stop this madness. Surely she would defend me, acknowledge my effort, and tell my sister to leave. But instead, her voice came calm, almost casual, as if she had rehearsed it. "Your sister doesn't have a job. She needs a place to stay. Your family, you can share. And since we'll need to support her, we're doubling your rent." For a moment I thought I had misheard. Doubling my rent? Punishing me for being responsible, while rewarding my sister's irresponsibility? I stood there in stunned silence, the phone pressed against my ear, as the realization sank in. Not only had my sister decided to invade my space, but my own parents were backing her up, treating my hard-earned independence as something disposable. My sister, still standing in the living room, laughed quietly to herself, as though she had already won. At that moment, a wave of betrayal unlike anything I had ever felt washed over me. This wasn't just about rent or an apartment, it was about years of favoritism, years of my parents excusing her failures and punishing my successes. And as I looked around at the four walls I had built into a home, I knew one thing for certain: if they thought I would simply accept this, they had underestimated me. Looking back, I shouldn't have been surprised. My parents had always drawn invisible lines between me and my sister, though they never admitted it out loud. Growing up, I was the child who had to earn everything. If I wanted new shoes, I had to work after school. If I dreamed of going on a trip, I had to save my allowance for months. Meanwhile, my sister only had to pout or cry, and suddenly new clothes or spending money appeared in her hands as if by magic. At family dinners, she was the golden one, the one who could do no wrong, even when her grades slipped or when she quit yet another part-time job. The excuses were endless: "She's sensitive, she's just figuring things out, don't be so hard on her." But when it came to me, there was no margin for error. If I came home with an A instead of an A+, I was scolded for not trying hard enough. If I showed any frustration, I was called ungrateful. I learned early that in our family, responsibility was a burden only I had to carry, while my sister floated through life cushioned by my parents' endless justifications. That pattern followed us into adulthood. When I landed my first steady job, I celebrated quietly by signing a lease for this apartment, one of the properties my parents owned. It wasn't handed to me. I paid full rent, every month, never once late, never once asking for a discount. I saw it as proof that I could stand on my own 2 feet, even if the roof above me technically belonged to them. Meanwhile, my sister drifted from one failed opportunity to the next. College classes abandoned halfway through, jobs quit after a week, relationships that collapsed because she expected everyone else to carry her weight. Each time, she would come crawling back home, and each time, my parents would welcome her with open arms, telling me, family takes care of each other. But family never seemed to include me. It was as if my role was not to be cared for, but to serve as the silent example, the one who always worked harder so they could justify her failures. I had hoped things might change as we got older, that maybe my parents would see how lopsided everything had been. Yet nothing changed. If anything, the gap grew wider. My achievements were brushed aside with a quick nod, while my sister's smallest efforts were celebrated like triumphs. I still remember when I got promoted at work and proudly told my parents. My father smiled politely and then turned to ask my sister if she had thought more about applying for another class at community college. My moment disappeared into thin air, as if it never mattered. Those memories came rushing back the morning she barged into my apartment. The way she dropped her bags onto the floor wasn't just a physical act, it was a performance, a declaration that she had the right to take what I had built because my parents would let her. And when I heard my mother's calm, dismissive voice over the phone, telling me that my rent would double to support her, the truth crystallized. This wasn't a new betrayal. It was simply the latest chapter in a lifetime of being treated like the backup plan, the steady foundation they could lean on while indulging her failures. But something inside me shifted that day. For the first time, instead of swallowing the unfairness and moving on, I felt a spark of resolve. If my parents wanted to gamble with my life to protect my sister, they would soon learn that I wasn't the child who stayed quiet anymore. This wasn't just another moment of favoritism. This was the moment they crossed a line, and I knew I would never let them cross it again. In the days that followed, the tension inside that apartment thickened like smoke. My sister sprawled across the couch as if she had always lived there, eating my groceries, leaving dishes in the sink, and blasting the television while I tried to work. When I asked her to contribute, even in the smallest way, she scoffed and reminded me, "Mom said I could stay here. If you have a problem, take it up with her." And when I did call my mother, hoping she would see reason, the response was always the same tired refrain, "She's your sister. You need to help her until she gets back on her feet." Back on her feet, those words became a bitter joke to me, because she had never once tried to stand on her own. Then came the letter. My parents delivered it by hand, a crisp piece of paper with new rental terms. My monthly payment was now doubled, effective immediately. I stood in the kitchen, staring at the document in disbelief. My sister leaned against the doorframe, grinning, and said, "Looks like you're paying for both of us now." "Thanks, little sibling." It was the kind of mocking tone that could make anyone's blood boil, and it did. I felt rage knotting in my chest, but beneath that rage was something sharper, a clarity I had never felt before. They thought I was trapped. They thought I would swallow the injustice the way I always had. But I wasn't the same person I used to be. At work, I stayed late into the evenings, running numbers, planning scenarios. Could I afford to move? Where would I go? My parents assumed they held the power because technically the apartment belonged to them. But what they didn't realize was that I had already built the kind of independence they could never take away. My income was stable. My savings were real. And unlike my sister, I didn't wait around for others to rescue me. Still, every interaction during those weeks pushed me closer to the edge. My sister started hosting her unemployed friends in the apartment, filling the living room with laughter while I shut myself in my bedroom, clenching my fists, reminding myself not to explode. One night, I found her wearing my clothes without permission, sipping wine I had bought for myself, and when I confronted her, she sneered, "You're so uptight. Loosen up. It's not like you worked that hard for this place." That was the final insult. Not only did she take over my home, but she erased my struggle, my sacrifices, as if none of it mattered. And when I told my parents how unbearable it had become, they chuckled and said, "Don't be dramatic. You're lucky to have family around you. One day you'll thank us." Lucky. That word echoed in my mind like a cruel joke. I wasn't lucky, I was being used. Every time I paid that inflated rent, every time I bit my tongue while my sister wasted space and resources, I realized I was funding their favoritism. They laughed at my frustration, certain I would never walk away. But behind my silence, a plan was forming. I began visiting new neighborhoods on the weekends, discreetly meeting with landlords, touring apartments far from my parents' watchful eyes. Each step felt like reclaiming a piece of my dignity. I didn't tell anyone what I was doing. Not my friends, not my coworkers, and certainly not my family. I wanted the shock to hit them all at once, the way their betrayal had hit me. But while my plan took shape, the daily provocations continued. My sister bragged about how she had won because she no longer had to live under our parents' roof. My mother scolded me for not being more welcoming. My father shook his head in disappointment, telling me I was selfish for not embracing the new arrangement. They painted me as the villain for wanting peace in my own home. Yet with every insult, every laugh at my expense, they only tightened the spring coiling inside me. They thought I was powerless. They thought I had no choice but to obey. What they didn't see was that I was preparing to teach them a lesson they would never forget. And the beauty of it was that I didn't need to shout, fight, or beg for fairness. All I had to do was take back what was mine, quietly, decisively, and leave them to choke on the silence of an empty apartment. The breaking point came one weekend when I returned from a long shift at work, exhausted and desperate for a quiet night. As I unlocked the door, laughter spilled out into the hallway, loud and mocking. I stepped inside to find my living room packed with my sister's friends, half-empty beer bottles scattered across the table, my sofa stained with food crumbs. She was in the center of it all, acting like the proud hostess of a place she didn't pay a cent for. When she spotted me, she raised her glass and shouted, "Welcome home, landlord. Don't worry, the rent's covered because of you." The whole room erupted in laughter, their eyes fixed on me as though I were some kind of pathetic joke. My cheeks burned, not with embarrassment, but with a fury that threatened to choke me. I stormed into the kitchen, hoping to avoid a scene, but my sister followed me, her smirk never fading. "Why are you so tense? You're paying double now, so I might as well enjoy it. It's practically my place too." Her words pierced like daggers, but what hurt most was knowing she was right in one sense. My own parents had legitimized her intrusion. She leaned against the counter and added with a mocking sweetness, "You'll never actually leave. You love this place too much, and besides, where would you go? Mom and Dad said you couldn't survive without their help." That sentence cut deeper than anything else. Not only did my sister believe I was trapped, but my parents had told her outright that I wasn't strong enough to stand alone. The very people who should have been proud of my independence were belittling it behind my back. Later that night, after her friends finally left, my mother called. I hoped, foolishly, that maybe she had noticed how far things had gone. Instead, she laughed lightly and said, "You need to relax. Your sister is going through a hard time. You should be grateful you have the means to support her. Family comes first." But what she meant was my sister comes first. Always. When I tried to protest, my father's voice joined the call, firm and unyielding. "If you can't handle this arrangement, maybe you should reconsider whether you're mature enough to live on your own." Betrayal twisted in my chest like a knife. Not only were they dismissing my efforts, but now they were mocking the very independence I had built. It was as though no matter what I achieved, in their eyes I would always be lesser, always the child they could exploit to prop up the daughter who refused to grow. That night, as I lay in bed listening to my sister snore loudly in the next room, I realized I had reached the lowest point. My family had stripped me of dignity, of respect, and even of the home I had worked so hard to afford. They thought they had beaten me, cornered me into submission. But what they didn't know was that my plan was already in motion, and soon, their smug confidence would turn to shock. Because I was done playing the role of the overlooked sibling. It was time to remind them that every boundary crossed comes with consequences. The morning I decided to act came without warning. My sister was still asleep on the couch, her clothes tossed across the floor, the faint smell of last night's cheap beer hanging in the air. I stood quietly by the door, my packed suitcases lined neatly beside me. I had spent weeks preparing for this moment, signing a new lease, moving essentials little by little when no one was watching, ensuring not a single detail would give away my plan. They thought I was cornered, but in truth, I had been building my escape brick by brick. Before leaving, I took one final look around. The apartment that had once felt like proof of my independence had turned into a cage, poisoned by my parents' favoritism and my sister's entitlement. But the beauty of it all was that I wasn't walking away defeated, I was walking away with everything they never believed I had: control, stability, and a future not bound to their manipulations. That afternoon, my parents called, asking if I had transferred the new, doubled rent. I smiled as I answered, "No, because I don't live there anymore." Silence filled the line, followed by my mother's shocked voice, "What do you mean you don't live there? Where are you?" I could almost hear the panic seeping into her tone, as if she had never considered the possibility that I might choose myself over their demands. My father cut in sharply, "You're being ridiculous. You can't just leave. That apartment is ours." I let them rant for a moment before calmly replying, "Exactly. It's yours. Which means you can explain to your unemployed daughter how she's going to pay for it now." The weight of my words lingered in the silence that followed. For the first time, I had flipped the script. They were the ones left scrambling, not me. Hours later, the frantic calls began. First my sister, her voice dripping with outrage, "How could you just leave? Where am I supposed to stay?" Then my mother, trying to guilt-trip me with tears, "You've abandoned your family. Your sister needs you." And finally my father, his anger barely contained, "You've embarrassed us. How could you be so selfish?" But none of it touched me anymore. Their words, once sharp enough to wound, now sounded hollow, powerless against the freedom I had already claimed. In my new apartment, I sat on the floor surrounded by boxes, sipping tea in complete silence. It wasn't luxurious, it wasn't perfect, but it was mine, every square inch earned by my own effort, untouched by their control. And in that silence, I realized something extraordinary: I had never truly lived until I walked away from their grip. The days that followed were chaotic for them. My sister, forced to face reality, could no longer coast on my rent or my patience. Without my support, she finally had to look for work. My parents, deprived of the security they assumed I would always provide, were left to confront the consequences of their favoritism. For years they had believed I would bend until I broke. Instead, I had walked away intact, stronger than ever, and left them to sit in the emptiness they created. That was the truth they never saw coming: my silence wasn't weakness, it was preparation. And my revenge wasn't loud or cruel, it was simply living on my own terms, while they struggled with the lessons I had quietly delivered. In the weeks that followed, my life transformed in ways I hadn't anticipated. My new apartment, though modest, felt like a sanctuary. Every morning I woke up to silence, no sister lounging on my couch, no dirty dishes left in the sink, no mocking laughter filling the rooms I had once worked so hard to maintain. For the first time in years, I felt the weight of my family's expectations lift off my shoulders. It was as though I could finally breathe. Meanwhile, the calls from my parents dwindled from angry demands to guilty attempts at reconciliation. At first, they accused me of selfishness, insisting I had abandoned family. But when they realized their words no longer had power over me, their tone shifted. They began to hint at regret, telling me perhaps they had been too harsh, perhaps they had expected too much from me. I listened, but I didn't let their apologies erase the reality of what they had done. Forgiveness, I realized, didn't mean returning to the same toxic cycle. It meant setting boundaries so the cycle could never repeat. My sister, too, was forced to confront a truth she had avoided all her life. Without me there to subsidize her laziness, she finally had to find employment. The shock of being left in an empty apartment, with no one to carry her weight, jolted her into action in a way my parents' protection never could. I heard through distant relatives that she was working part-time now, slowly beginning to understand what it meant to stand on her own. Whether she resented me or not didn't matter. What mattered was that she had no choice but to grow up. And that, in itself, was the consequence she had earned. As for me, I discovered something deeper than revenge. I discovered self-respect. For so long, I had believed that keeping the peace with my family was my responsibility, even if it meant sacrificing my own happiness. But walking away taught me that peace built on unfairness isn't peace at all, it's surrender. By choosing myself, I hadn't destroyed my family. I had forced them to confront the imbalance they had created, and in doing so, I freed myself from their control. The victory wasn't in watching them struggle. It was in realizing that I no longer needed their approval to feel whole. My independence was no longer something they could grant or take away, it was mine, earned, permanent. Looking back now, I understand that my revenge was never about cruelty. It was about reclaiming my voice after years of being silenced. It was about drawing a line and saying, no more. And in that quiet, decisive act of leaving, I found a kind of strength my parents never believed I had. They thought they could laugh at my plans, dismiss my efforts, and keep me bound by guilt. But in the end, it was their laughter that turned hollow, their plans that collapsed, and my future that opened wide with possibility. My story isn't just about revenge, it's about healing. Because sometimes, the most powerful revenge isn't screaming or fighting. It's walking away with dignity, forcing those who underestimated you to finally face the emptiness they created. And as I sit in my own home, surrounded by the life I built with my own hands, I know one thing with absolute certainty. I didn't just take back my independence, I became untouchable. So that is how I reclaimed my independence, not through shouting, not through fighting, but by walking away and leaving them with the silence of an empty apartment and the weight of their own choices. My parents were forced to face the consequences of years of favoritism, my sister was forced to grow up, and I finally found freedom. But now I want to turn the question to you. Have you ever been in a situation where your family pushed you too far, where their favoritism or lack of respect left you with no choice but to draw a line? Did you stay and endure it, or did you find the courage to walk away? If you were in my shoes, watching your hard work dismissed, your independence mocked, and your sacrifices taken for granted, what would you have done? Would you have stayed silent, or would you have chosen the kind of revenge that comes not from spite, but from self-respect? Share your thoughts with me in the comments. I'd love to know if you've ever had to teach your family the hard lessons of boundaries and respect. And if my story resonated with you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and join me for more true tales of betrayal, justice, and the kind of revenge that transforms pain into power.